welcome to the Innovation Summit. My name is Jim Boyle. I'm from the Yale Office of Cooperative Research, and we're very happy to be hosting this panel this morning on blockchain and internet security. And we have a great panel to run this conversation today and to talk about the various issues. And to run the festivities today, we're very pleased to have Tyler Kirk with Wilson Sonsini to moderate the panel and lead the conversation. So with that, I'll turn the conversation over to Tyler right now.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Really appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us today for this exciting panel on blockchain and security, and where blockchain is going to take the future of commerce in the United States and around the globe. What I wanted to do today is try to accomplish 4 goals. I wanted to try to demystify blockchain, if that's at all possible. And I know it's a buzzword. It's in every marketing piece you see on the internet right now, especially on Medium, if you guys are familiar with Medium posts. And then I want to talk about how does a management team go about deciding whether or not blockchain is a right investment or a right move for an existing business model. After that, we can turn to lessons learned in the trenches of people who've actually been out there, done the R&D, and tried to implement blockchain into an existing business. And then we'll touch on, if we have time, how to build on top of, or how to build a brand new business that is built on blockchain technology. But before we get into that, I want to introduce all our panelists and give each panelist an opportunity to give an opinion. Real briefly, guys, I know we can run on forever on our opinions on blockchain and where it is going to take us, but an opinion on the technology and where they think technology is going ahead and where blockchain is going to take us as an economy. So with that, I'll introduce myself. Again, my name is Tyler Kirk. I'm an attorney at Wilson, Sonsini, Goodrich & Rosati. My background is securities law. I got my first job at the Securities and Exchange Commission. I'm very familiar with capital markets, and therefore my opinion is based on capital formation and how blockchain is going to revolutionize, disrupt, or do none of the above with respect to existing capital market infrastructure. I do not believe that it is going to truly decentralize and replace all existing capital market infrastructure actors, but I think we're going to meet in the middle somewhere, and we're going to replace some existing processes with blockchain. So with that, I'll turn it over to Maya to introduce herself and to express an opinion on blockchain.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Maya Vujanovic. I'm an owner and a founder of O Group. It's an investment firm, token economics firm, and we are looking at raising a fund now. I've been in the space since 2011 when I got my first Bitcoin, and I went into GE after that in 2015-16 as an executive in global strategy, but really moved quickly into blockchain. I think where I have my opinion is really through my work, and this can tell you a lot. I've spent over a decade living and working in emerging markets in Africa and Latin America. I started a first company when I was 25 in Africa in mobile technologies. And at 29, I already realized that mobile tech and technologies such as Bitcoin are really powerful, and I think most people here in the Western countries take that for granted because we can depend on a dollar. Most world out there cannot depend on their own currency, and there's a massive difference when you hold a bank account on your phone versus a bank on your phone. And living in these places has made me realize that difference, and I invested in it from the beginning. In 2013, had a first company that is on distributed ledger on Wall Street called Noble Markets. We worked with the Federal Reserve and various banks to actually do clearing and settlement in a very different way. So I left all my previous jobs to do this full time, so that can give you my opinion on this technology.
Thanks, Maya. And so next, I believe, is it Donald or Jean?
It's Zhong.
Jean, please.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Zhong Shao. I have been a professor at Yale for 23 years. I'm currently chair of the computer science department. So my main research has always been on building secure software, operating system, and a distributed system. So in the last 20 years, the dream was to try to apply these mathematical formal techniques to prove properties about the software you write. So actually the first time I get to know blockchain is not through, it's very early days around 2009, 2010. I have a graduate students visiting PhD students from China who is supposed to work on formal verification of some assembly programs. He's not making good progress, and I was wondering what he has been working on. And later on, we realized that he actually was building a ASIC processor for mining Bitcoin. And so this, a few years later, you realize, wow, he is the top legend in that community. His nickname is called the Fried Cat. Some of you probably have heard about it. He has probably at one point earns, most number of Bitcoin. Sadly, we cannot find him, that's, So, you would think, being a professor who have worked on formal verification for many, many years and being an expert on how to write a secure software, if I go to the blockchain community, they will appreciate my credentials, but most of them don't care, actually. But when I say, Fried Cat is my, former student, that, is a huge difference. So back to, try to demystifying what to us, as a technology person, what a blockchain is. To me, really, all of us try to build what we call a secure, high-performance, programmable world computer. So all of us have a computer. We have our phone, we have a laptop, we have cloud computers. And we don't trust them because if the cloud computer is owned by a single company, you don't know whether it can be hacked by some hackers, or you don't trust the particular company owns that, machines. The blockchain world, really, from the technology point of view, is try to build something we call world computer that everybody can trust. And surprisingly, even though we know there's lots of security issues, blockchain computer or world computer is really to provide a minimum set of security guarantees. And the technique is to use what we call decentralization. That is, we will cluster hundreds of thousands of tens of thousands of computers together. The hacker can hack any number of them, but as long as they cannot hack a majority of them, then through consensus, the computer is still reliable. We can use it as if it's something that is unhackable hardware. And the technique people use today, whether it's a proof of work or using PBFT, Byzantine fault tolerance, it's all these techniques try to make the world computer hardware provide a basic platform so that you have a reasonable amount of trust. And so the current challenge facing the blockchain world from the technology point of view is how to make this world computer perform faster. Right now, each transaction on Bitcoin, blockchain, or Ethereum takes a long time to process. And so there's lots of work doing that.
Jean, can I interrupt you real quick?
Yeah.
Before you give away all of our good material, let me give Donald a chance to introduce himself real quick.
I will wrap up this point and we'll
please.
move on. And the other thing I'm trying to say is that it's the basic hardware we provide, and we are really trying to build how to make the computer faster and secure. So I will add more point later on.
All right, thank you, Jean. And Donald, please take a brief moment to introduce yourself and give us an opinion on where you think blockchain is and what do you think it's going to be useful for.
Sure. So I'm Donald Fisher. I study computer science here at Yale, and I'm a little bit panicked actually because Zhang was my instructor for my compilers course as an undergraduate. So I'm fearful that I'll be graded on my performance on the panel today. Please go gently, Zhang. Since that time, I've been alternately an entrepreneur and investor, primarily focused on open source software and applications of open source software. Spent the last 10 years as a venture capital investor in that space, most recently at a firm called General Catalyst based up in Boston. And last year, I shifted modes a little bit and went back to the entrepreneurship side, co-founded and am CEO of a company called Tidelift. And Tidelift is in a familiar area for me. It is our mission is to create new incentives for creators and maintainers of open source software that are facilitated by users of open source. So open source, I think, actually has an interesting relationship with blockchain technologies. Most of the prominent blockchains and their software are open source. There also is sort of a rhyme there between the decentralized, inherently distributed nature of open source software development or permissionless aspects of open source software development and the blockchain. And I think that there are some really cool new questions and opportunities around how can you, in addition to using open source to make these blockchains, how can you use new mechanisms that are enabled by cryptocurrencies, tokens, crypto economics to drive these incentives around the production of the software itself. You can see that it's already happened around some of the early projects like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and so on. Part of the incentive for individuals to contribute to those projects and write those that software is that they enable themselves to become a token holder or a coin holder, and they benefit from the appreciation of that new crypto asset. So with that, maybe I'll hand it back to Tyler.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. And so, Zhang, actually would like to kick off the first main topic of this panel with you and pick up where you left off on the efficiencies of blockchain, the current state of the technology. Where does the technology need to mature? And so those are questions of maturity, efficiency, scalability, security. Could you kind of speak to those points?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so just to pick up where I was talking about that conceptually, we need such a world computer, and actually many of them rather than just one world computers. The world computer that is secure and high perform efficiently and can be programmed. So right now, if you look at the state of the art, most of these public permissionless blockchain like Bitcoin and Ethereum are based on proof of work, which is not very efficient. So a lot of the current ongoing work is to develop these better schemes to speed up the performance. Why we, if it's a world computer, it won't be very useful if it cannot be programmed. So Bitcoin blockchain, for example, only let you do transactions on top of it, but Ethereum blockchain let you write smart contract. So that's a form of you can actually write a program, run on these machines, and you can write all kinds of a decentralized application. And so that add another level of flexibility, and that's what I mean by a programmable computer. However, even though the underlying machine provides some degree of security based on decentralization and consensus, all these new software layer you add, including these smart contracts, will not be secure if these programs are not verified or not tested thoroughly. So that's actually majority of today's all these vulnerability or all these attacks on blockchain was all about. It turns out that blockchain become a paradise for hackers, and all these software, like most of them, are open source, and people can look at the code, and so security become a serious issues, and there's lots of startup companies and people are trying to develop these new techniques. So those are the performance and the security side. I do want to add one last point about why the computer scientists are so fascinated about the blockchain, not necessarily from the commercial point of view, from the money point of view. In fact, most computer scientists wants to essentially, what they want to do is to virtualize everything in the physical world, right? The development of computing more or less is we are moving more and more of things in the physical world into the virtual world. And so such a world computer with the ability to actually, storing currency and modeling these decentralized autonomous organization like DAO companies is just the fascinating virtual world that many computer scientists try to accomplish. And furthermore, computer program running on this world computer will have the ability to automatically charge and pay, transfer payment and provide incentive for all type of services. It's just a fascinating world for computer scientists because this is something that we thought we haven't been able to virtualize up till now. So intellectually, it's a whole new world, and that's why a lot of computer scientists, even though they are not primarily working on blockchain, they are fascinated about this idea.
I think, Tyler, can I add
please
on? There are a number of things that Professor is mentioning that are very key to the development of all this, be it that you are approaching it from a research point of view, or that you're actually developing a startup, or you're trying to run pilots. And one of the things is security. We've noticed in a lot of the POCs and pilots that we've done, the myth out there when they say, blockchain is secure and will solve everything, including your marital problems, right? It's not. It's a myth. It is completely secure, and it's a myth that it's a mutable record, right? So that's one of the biggest things out there that I'm quite vocal around that, to show that there are massive security issues in blockchain. On the other side, on the digital world, that's directly linked to, let's say, industrials, right? In GE, while I was the CIO at GE, there's something called digital twin, right, that they had. And so that is creating every single physical asset you have that you can work on, you're recreating in a digital world. And so that can allow you to do many things that are much cheaper than you would do in a physical world. Also, digital identity, which is a massive piece of a blockchain. And I think if we, not just for a human identity, which is, again, another myth, that when we talk about identity, people automatically think of just human identity. Why? Because we have egos and we only think of ourselves. But there are machines and machine identity and IoT, right? So one of the examples at General Electric, while I was there, my idea was to create a wallet on an actual machine and to give it full autonomy. So you give it a token wallet. Machine is not going to transact between, in dollars. It is going to do it in tokens in the future. And so you actually load it up with the token, and and it is able to run predictive analytics on itself and figure out a part of its, part is going to go broke in a month, and it orders a part through a smart contract from a supplier, right, through those tokens. And you can then decide how you net and settle at your company, right, at the end of the quarter. So those are fascinating things of digital identities that people really don't talk about, but it is a massive part of this digital new world that we are entering, and it's already existing, right? It's just a matter of time that we start having digital twins on the cloud somewhere or on blockchain.
Thanks, Maya. So this concept of moving things that are in the physical world into the digital world, Maya called it the digital twin. And Zhang picked up on that as well. And putting things in the digital world onto a blockchain as a record of transactions kind of raises up the next question for me. And Donald, I'll put it to you, and the rest of the panelists feel free to jump in. When you have an existing business and you're trying to look at the promise of blockchain and the ability for blockchain to come in and improve your existing business model, maybe inject efficiencies to the way you do business, and also help your bottom line. What are some of the things you think about as a business trying to go through that analysis of, is blockchain right for me? And before I'll let everyone dive into that question, I'll kind of tee it up too with a recent academic paper that I read, and I think it's about a year old, but they talk about a matrix where you have, or a quadrant, where you have on one axis you have the novelty of the idea, and then on the other axis you have the coordination that's required, or the buy-in that's required from the community to make that idea work. And so you can think that on the most bottom corner of the quadrant you have low novelty, low coordination, and then at the very top corner of the quadrant you have high buy-in, high coordination, and high novelty. And so there's low risk to really high risk business lines. With that framework in mind, and maybe you can just ignore it altogether, but what are some of the things you think about when you're trying to decide as an existing business, is blockchain right for me? And would a matrix like that be helpful in doing that analysis?
Yeah, Tyler, I think it's a really good question, and I'm eager to hear the whole panel's thoughts on that topic. I mean, I would say that one thing that I observe is that a lot of the early activity around blockchain and crypto token technologies is this literal application to existing businesses or forms of exchange, right? So I have diamonds, let's put the diamonds on the blockchain. Avocado toast, let's do avocado toast on the blockchain. We'll track the avocados and watch them go bad and stuff like that. And I think there probably is there are a variety of arguments for lowering the friction of coordination of multiple parties in a lot of different forms of commerce. To me, though, the most far-reaching and interesting and ultimately impactful applications, though, are probably going to be like emergent new behaviors, new things, new forms of exchange that are enabled by these technologies. And there are just whole new building blocks that now can be used to design new business models. So, for example, one of the technological building blocks that's extremely well enabled by certain blockchain technologies are prediction markets or auction futures markets. There are projects like Augur or Gnosis that have been early popular projects in different blockchain communities. But each of those is demonstrating a form of information exchange that could be used in all kinds of different ways. And you already see sort of second-order businesses layering on top of that business model. For example, there's this amazing decentralized hedge fund called Numerai that has adapted a number of the early mechanisms from the Augur prediction market and is basically using those technology approaches to allow individual stock market traders to contribute algorithmic trading strategies to a virtualized global hedge fund. And the particular way the blockchain is used there is there's a challenge in terms of getting individuals to not just suggest a trading strategy, but also give them an incentive to reveal their confidence in that strategy, so you can decide as the pool of funds how much you want to allocate to each of those trading strategies. It's kind of a new, crazy, weird thing that didn't exist before. It's not just fidelity on the blockchain. It's sort of a new thing. So those, I think, are examples of some of the emergent behaviors and emergent opportunities that are going to come out of nowhere based on this new technology base.
I think I would summarize it in one way. Where there's a lack of trust in your system and you're trying to take friction out of your system, that's exactly where you should be testing blockchain. And what I mean by that is don't apply it to Donald's point to tracking avocados, right? Yes, I mean, Walmart is doing it right now, right, to traceability of food, but for different reasons, right, for safety, for temperature, right, you can do all of that on a blockchain. But really, one of the places that when I designed the framework at GE, right, we thought through this, and, anywhere we trade finance, right? Things of bill of lading, right? Supply chain, provenance tracking, right? These are, yes, you can tell me you can do the same thing in electronic database. And we had some of the head of ITs argue that we can use electronic database. It's not the same. And, I would love to hear an expert in computer science here say it, but I work with developers and coders and hackers who actually show you this is not the same, and it does not accomplish the same thing. So the first line of mechanism in a lot of these organizations is to defend the status quo for various reasons. And so now as an investor, what we invest in is I look for a low-hanging fruit. if you're taking friction out of the system, and to Professor's point, right, if you're using it for payments and you're trying to remove a bank or remove anything in the middle between me and you exchanging value, then that's what I'm going to look at. And when there's a high level of untrustworthy relationship. That also poses a problem in a lot of my thought leadership that I talk about, which is people say supply chain is a perfect use case for blockchain. Not really, because it really is about incentive structures. And this is where game theory comes in handy and token economics and understanding that. If actors in that network are not incentivized to have transparency, I don't care that you have perfect technology. It won't work, and it doesn't work. And so you might have a perfect system that by math and computer science it works, but doesn't necessarily mean it will be applied in a commercial sense. So I would say as an investor, to answer your question, what I would do is lack of trust, and where you're taking the friction out of the system and a low-hanging fruit. And then you can look at things such as, things maybe in healthcare and doing cell sequencing on blockchain and other cool stuff. But that's kind of my summary.
Thanks, Maya. So we've been joined by Kat. Thanks for joining the panel.
Thank you.
So prior to your arrival, we had everyone on the panel introduce themselves and to also state a brief opinion on blockchain technology, where is it going to take us, and what the current state of blockchain technology is. So, Kat, if you would like to just give us an introduction to yourself and what your opinion of blockchain is.
Sure. So I'm Kat. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Simply Vital Health, and we are creating the blockchain infrastructure that is safely adoptable by healthcare. So we're fully behind healthcare, so perhaps my perspective is a little biased, but we're one of the only revenue-generating blockchain and healthcare companies in the world. We have 4 enterprise clients. We have a services and support arm of our company, of which we also have clients, and we have an open source software that uses a token, which we're doing a token generation event for right now, and we have 3 to 4 companies that have developed on their own without our support. So we are fully embedded and focused on blockchain technology. Where we think it's going is that it can absolutely transform healthcare, personally, but all verticals, if it's implemented in the right way. And I think you've already heard 3 viewpoints on that. We started with a very practical, realistic implementation of blockchain technology, which is why we were able to attain revenue so quickly. We focused on that point that does reduce friction, that is actually a business pain point in healthcare, and that's really our direction. So while we create the infrastructure, if we're working with healthcare entrepreneurs, which we do, we try to move them in that direction to focus on, don't use blockchain as a shiny object, use blockchain for what it should really be used for. A very, very good example is actually health information exchanges. So over 3 to 5 years ago, $564 million from the federal government poured into the creation of health information exchanges. Almost all of them have failed. And the reason why is because it lacked 2 things. 1, the business incentive to actually share the data. Sharing data in healthcare is not tech. You can't just implement blockchain and all these things are going to start flowing. It's actually a business issue. There has to be business alignment in order to make that data flow. And the other reason is the lack of trust. And I actually saw this firsthand when I worked at Yale New Haven Health System as a hospital administrator. When I was there, we needed data, and we used data for very critical decisions and non-critical decisions. My role was to grow the market share for the entire hospital for the medicine and surgery service lines. It was really hard to get data. It was really hard to create a network in the state because all the mom and pop physicians thought that we were going to take that data and we were going to alter it for our own good. So that data provenance and being able to prove that we didn't change that data and they could trust sharing that data and we'd create a better network is really, really important, and that's where blockchain can thrive. So I think it's moving in the right direction. I think it has an opportunity to be quite transformative, but it needs to be practical in its implementation.
So one of the questions I had before we went into this discussion was, how does an existing business and how does the management team of an existing business decide whether or not blockchain is right for them? You did something different, I believe, which is you decided to start a brand new business, not to alter an existing business, but to start a brand new business and build it on top of blockchain. What did you know about blockchain that no one else knew that allowed you this opportunity to start this business?
Yeah, so it really started back in 2014. So I'd been at Yale New Haven for about 6 months and realized that an entrepreneurial journey was more right for my soul. And then I started reading and researching, and blockchain fell in my lap. I actually learned about blockchain before I learned about cryptocurrency. When you meet people that are in blockchain or crypto, ask them about the rabbit hole, because the stories are fascinating. So this was my rabbit hole, and I read every single article, textbook, I watched every video that existed on blockchain technology, and I understood it inside and out, and I realized that it would transform healthcare. And in order to be always on the competitive edge as an industry and as a company, which I'm an extremely competitive person, so I wanted to do, I realized that we need to use blockchain technology or we would be left in the dust. But I also needed to make sure that I understood it from a technical standpoint. I am not a developer, but I do need to be able to talk about it and figure out how to communicate that with the healthcare administrators that we're working with. So I actually did not start with blockchain. I started with problem finding in healthcare. This technology landed in my lap, and because I knew where it was going and the potential that it could transform based on, if you study historically in technology, there's a reason why open source tech has not survived. And the reason why is because it lacks that incentive. Blockchain fixes that. Now you have an open source technology, you have trust in a system, and you have an incentive. It's a perfect storm. With all of the issues in healthcare, it seemed like the right decision.
So Donald, you're involved in open source software and technology. And
Not all has failed.
And my
haven't
job
failed
is
yet.
moderators who invoke controversy. So, and Maya was just speaking about incentive structures. So, and I see a couple of threads that we can kind of run down here in this conversation. So we have open source technology and we have incentive structures. Does blockchain, where do you think blockchain fits into the open source model, and can the incentive structure assist the open source software model?
Yeah, I think there's, again, I said before, I think they sort of rhyme, open source and the decentralized nature of these blockchain technologies. On the one hand, these platforms, networks could not actually be decentralized and permissionless if they were not open source, if they were not available for anybody to take the code and sort of stand up a node and participate, right? So it's almost a prerequisite, I think, for the substantial public, truly decentralized blockchains. I think the question about incentives around open source is one that I've spent a lot of time focusing on. I was involved with, from the early stages, building one of the still largest commercial businesses around open source, Red Hat, which is now a $3 billion a year revenue business, $30 billion market cap company. So I think there are success stories. At the individual open source developer level, there are a whole bunch of different incentives, motivations that drive people to write this code, release it on the internet. And then the really hard part is actually once you've written the code and released it and you have a bunch of people using it, who's going to maintain that thing? I mean, there's this question of innovation being great, but maintenance being necessary. And who is going to actually show up day in and day out and take care of that software that's so critical to all kinds of systems that we're building in our civilization, right? And there's been some very messy examples where, previously not widely known components like this library OpenSSL had a really critical vulnerability in it. It led to this branded episode called Heartbleed that was sort of a security crisis a couple of years ago. There was one even more recently that was labeled Spectre. These things get brands and logos now when a security vulnerability happens. So one of the really interesting questions for me is, even though there are incentives that have led people to create and then maintain these open source software ecosystems, it hasn't been a fully solved problem. I think that's an apt point to make. And can the token-driven incentivization or cryptocurrency facilitated exchange, can we add another set of incentives to care for that software that we depend on?
So I actually want to add that one of the fascinating part about the smart contract and also the blockchain ecosystem is precisely the potential, promise that it can change the open source community and to make the incentive transparent. So the current open source community is kind of like a communist or socialist world where you have a good faith, write your code, and you contribute, and then you let everybody use it, and eventually some payment or some return will come back to you, but nobody can track that, right? And I think the programming model provided by blockchain, or especially like the Ethereum smart contract, they literally count, how much resource you are going to use to run a program, and you have to pay gas in order to run these machines. So the infrastructure has the capability of deciding how much currency or how much gas or how much these tokens can be moved from one place to another automatically and transparently when you design these systems. And of course, one of the challenges is to make sure that if you are supposed to only move $100 when you finish this work, it cannot be hacked to 1,000 or 1 million, right? So that's the kind of a challenge that the computer scientists are actively working on. And actually, I and one of my former PhD students started a company in recent months called 30Care, where the job is try to prove, to verify these smart contracts and to create this kind of incentivized, I would call incentivized or transparent open source communities for writing these smart contracts.
And one thing that I like to remind people is that this industry is still very young. So give us some time and some grace. It took us a really long time to build the internet. There's a lot of creativity and opportunity in blockchain. Let's not try to push this too fast. And we have become so accustomed to rapid and fast and swift development. Yes, we're going to get there faster than it took to build the internet, but there's still a lot of things that we're trying to figure out right now. There are a lot of really creative incentive structures for how you can use and leverage both smart contracts and on-chain and off-chain governance. So if you dig into our white paper, we've actually created, the way that we built our protocol is actually a public permission blockchain. We had to do that because it's healthcare. Eventually, and I really like blockchain, but I'm not one of those people that's just like super evangelical about it. I'm quite practical about actually making this happen. Maybe in 10 to 15 years, we'll get to a truly decentralized society. Maybe in 10 to 15 years, we'll get to a point where healthcare is comfortable with a truly decentralized product, but we're not there yet. So we chose to start with a public permission protocol. But in that public permission protocol, it actually requires a consortium and governance process of which we are a part, and we can get kicked out at any point. Our software is going to run. It actually is already running. You can test it on if you're familiar with blockchain, you can actually test it on the RINKB testnet right now with a fake token. If something were to happen to us as a company, that product would still be able to run and survive, and that token would still be able to move throughout the system, which is a really important part. Yes, we'll be there to help move it and push it forward, but there's a point where that consortium, that governance is eventually going to take over and move forward. That's the creativity that's required to actually make this work. For smart contracts, there are always going to be bugs in smart contracts. There are always going to be bad actors. But what you need to look at is the ecosystem as a whole. There's a company called QuantStamp that created a token, and their whole purpose is to audit your smart contracts. Right now, smart contract auditing is a very centralized service. We use a company called Hosho. They're a private company. They don't have a token. It's a very good service right now, but there's an opportunity to decentralize that. So when you're thinking about blockchain technology, and the opportunity, you need to look at the ecosystem as a whole and how we're all working together, and give us some time.
I think one last point, Tyler. I think Professor's comment made me think about a larger picture here, which is a really conversation we need to be having about what currency means. And I think everybody's focusing on blockchain, Bitcoin, permissionless. What is it? Where do I make money? How do I apply it? But really the conversation here is much deeper and larger, which is the exchange of currency. And in the future, your currency will be a reputation. And so there is not just proof of work, proof of stake, there's proof of authority, there's proof of trust. And so sometimes these networks will be maintained just by proof of trust. And so I think it's just a larger picture. We can go deep into these conversations, but it really is a conversation around what is a currency in the future. And it won't be, to your point earlier, right? It will not be just one or only one crypto or 5 crypto and 2 fiat or whatever. It will be a schizophrenic environment. It is what it is, right?
Right. And so, Jean, I'd like to go back to you and talk about, just for the audience benefit, the difference between a permission or permissionless blockchain, a public versus private blockchain, and as a kind of a corollary or follow-on to that, I think you alluded this too, that blockchain may have a scaling problem. As more and more work gets done through a blockchain protocol, how do blockchains scale? So if you can kind of tackle both of those questions, that'd be wonderful.
Sure. I would say that in the blockchain community, there's actually different viewpoints. Some people only think, only permissionless blockchain are real blockchain. And many people who truly believe decentralization really think, oh, that's what we mean by blockchain. When you talk about a permissioned blockchain, we are typically talking about a distributed system, what we usually call, where contains a large number of machines, and only certain company, certain party or business party can participate. And of course, the technique used to ensure decentralization is somewhat different because it's not fully accessible like the permissionless blockchain. However, in the last 2 years, there have been huge number of advance on how to build a decentralized distributed system, mostly based upon techniques, relying on Byzantine fault tolerance or variants of these algorithms. However, there's additional challenges such as how to maintain privacy, how to add anonymization. So on top of blockchain, there will be lots of new challenges, and I think the question of what each application domain need to use is still quite open. To just go back to the analogy of I'm talking about blockchain as a world computer. Today, we basically just have the bare hardware. Even though we run these EVM on each machine, we basically just have a very thin layer. All it can do is to move transaction around. And when you have a computer, if you want to make it usable, you have to build an operating system. So the question would be, what would be the operating system? What would be the application library running on top of these blockchains? And it could be, in fact, if you view world computer as not just the blockchain itself, but plus these, side chains, side blockchains, and all the additional service laid on top of blockchains, we are looking at something that really very much like, I would say, previous panel probably, that is quantum computer is not just the quantum hardware. You have to build all these layers of, system, compiler, and so on. And the same is true for blockchain, world computers. And there's all kinds of research problems, and that we're still yet to have to address. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'd like to talk about something. I think maybe you can kind of speak to this a little bit, but the rest of the panel, feel free to jump in. What are some of the lessons learned in the trenches of trying to get, when you're at GE and elsewhere, when you're trying to get blockchains deployed in the real world and real business applications? What tough lessons have you learned?
First question is, what's blockchain? Yeah. I can just give a quick overview. First time I went in front of the leadership at GE and I said, we need to invest in controls and sensors and blockchain. And the number one question was, what's blockchain? And I said, have you heard of Bitcoin? And they said, oh, is that the thing people buy illegal guns with? Mm-hmm. That was the initial reaction. And I said, yes, but so do we with fiat. So are you going to stop using it? And there was silence in the room. And so it took a while. It took a couple of months. But they, at the time, the CEO really kind of took it forward, and he said, look, take it forward, see what we find, and across the company. And I found 2 people across the company that knew anything. Was a computer scientist and a hacker that actually knew anything, and a hacker that went under 2 initials, right, that we keep in a dark room. And so I made sure never to give him my email, yeah. But we were.
It wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto, was it?
No. But this was part of this. This was part of their opening to me. I belong to Satoshi's Roundtable, and I've been for the last 6 years. And so it was, they did listen. They said, I didn't talk about Bitcoin and blockchain. I talked about exchange of currency, and I talked about decentralization of models, and I talked about larger, deeper issues of, what does it mean to have, suddenly traceability of your parts. Companies such as Samsung and GE and many other electronic and large asset companies, out of maybe 3,000, 4,000 parts, they can only track 200 or 300 of those parts. That's a massive liability, and then they pay a lot of money towards. And so, when you start finding some of the tech solutions, of course they're going to listen. Second, in massive global operation systems in these large companies, you have literally billions of dollars of trapped cash. There are companies now that are being developed, one of which we invested as a former president of Visa that left and started it. And he's just attacking corporate treasury because you are dealing with people who have been in the companies of minimum of 15 years, maximum of 30 something. And you can't blame them, right? It's all of us humans. We have that predisposition of just continuous routine. We have quarterly reportings, and please don't bother me with anything else because I might lose my job. And in addition to that, I think there's a big issue we're facing right now in the world. And some might argue it's opposite on the future work concept, that a lot of these emerging technologies are not going to take over our jobs. Look, they'll give an example and say IT industry never existed and everybody was afraid and now there's a whole new department and we're okay. But I think what's coming at us now is much faster. And so I think at the large companies, it was a pushback. But number one was because, one, we did not understand it. Number two is, holy bleep, this can disrupt us, right? Suddenly you're looking at middleman disappearing. And number three is where to start. How do you even carve out that POC and a pilot, and what works and what's scalable? And because somebody's a public company, right, it's very hard to jump on things such as Bitcoin, which at the time had a really bad press, right? It still does have a bad press. Now, I will just challenge that with one view, which is a really powerful view now that goes along with conversations of quantum computing and the excess power and computing power that we're going to have, be it in our brain or in our phones that we have. Any physical asset these large companies have, manufacturing, planes, right? I'll give you an example of the engines, because I was in mining and I thought, I called the aviation at GE and I said, to CEO, how much do you test of these engines? And he said, well, we test them every week. And I said, how much electricity do you produce? So something ridiculous, like 100 megawatts or something crazy. And I said, well, do you link it back into the thing? Do you sell it? What do you do with it? No, it evaporates. I said, why don't we just attach a machine and mine crypto and pay for your whole aviation? There was a blank stare in the room, right? And these are new business models. I'm not saying, right, that this is something that should be done straight away, but these are things that can be done, and these are things that people are looking at, and this is a new business model, right? And excess power we have in the world, and particularly some places in, let's say, Central America, where sometimes electricity is a zero, or you cannot export it. People are starting to do this. You don't need to construct new power plants and take away from the environment. You can actually use existing assets. So, bunch of examples like that.
So as you can see, there's a lot to unpack in blockchain. We have an extremely talented panel here. We're running out of time, and so I would like to thank each one of our panelists for sharing your time and your wisdom with us. We really appreciate your insights on blockchain technology. Maya, thank you very much. Kat, we appreciate you joining us. Professor Zhang, thank you. And Donald, keep fighting the good fight in open source technology, man. All right, thank you.